I work with Culligan, who's one of the largest water filtration companies in the world. And we have a whole brand new line that is actually in production right now that's going to be launched this year. And in the very first meeting, which was last January, there were two people from their ESG team in the room. And 5 years ago, that would not have happened. And the way that I would describe that is it's really table stakes. Whenever we're meeting with a customer for the first time or on a new brand, our first question is always, what's your sustainability directive? What are your commitments? And the good news is 9 times out of 10, somebody already has that as they've already got a standard. They've already got that as part of their tenets. That's new. 5 years ago, it wasn't that way.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the social impact of conscious companies and everyday heroes. Hear inspiring stories from those who put people and planet before profit and personal gain. You'll learn how you can make a difference, vote with your dollars, and get involved today. Here's your host, Corinna Bellizzi.
Hello and welcome to Care More, Be Better. Each week, I invite you to care more about a specific social or environmental issue so that we can create a better world together. This week is no exception, as we're going to dive into the world of garbage. And not just any garbage, the garbage that makes its way into your home as packaging and out the door as downcycled materials, recycled materials, and as trash. For this discussion, I am joined by Elizabeth Corbett, a sustainable packaging expert that supports brands across cannabis, health, beauty, and the consumer industries as a whole. Her aim is to help make our packaging solutions smarter and greener. With that, let me welcome her to the stage. Elizabeth Corbett, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Feel like we are birds of a feather here, each working to tackle this from our own arenas. I really seek to limit plastic in the brands that I work with, and with the key example being Orlo Nutrition. I wanted to go ahead and start off today's discussion with a few statistics, so I hope you don't mind me reading those out. 40% of global plastic waste comes from packaging. That's a huge number. 141 million tons of plastic packaging are produced each year. So we're talking, tens of millions of tons of plastic packaging. The US, Europe, and China together account for 60% of the world's entire packaging waste. And the US EPA estimates that 30% of our solid waste, not recycling, is plastic. The EU, however, does a better job. They recycle an estimated 84.2% of their packaging waste. So what do you make of all this? How can we do better?
Actually, I think one of the things that you said is one of the things that I'm most passionate about, and I'll be honest, I don't have an answer, is the fact that you said the EU does a way better job of it. And one of the things, and you touched on a lot of areas that are difficult, but one of the things that I find challenging in the United States is just our whole garbage system is broken. And when you look at the fact that if you live in a municipality like Seattle or Portland, you can recycle or compost almost anything, right? And if you live in Miami, recycling it's just not, well, to give you an example is instead of dealing with recycling and compost, they are trying to figure out what to do because they're running out of landfill space. So it's just it's a different mindset. I live part-time in South Florida and part-time in Seattle. And one of the things that was very difficult for me when I first started living here was I'm used to composting everything. And it pains me to put carrot peels or anything in the garbage or anything bad food. And if there was a way that I could figure out, and I'm working on it, but if there was a way that I could help municipalities in other parts of the United States deal with the overall and recycling and composting, that would be a really big differentiator. Because I think that we can all make changes individually, but to really address this, it has to be done on a larger scale.
It needs to be done at a systems level. I agree. I mean, I'm in Santa Cruz County, and I advocated locally for our municipality to start composting services. They didn't for a long, long time. And now 2 winters ago, they added that solution where we can just add our compost material to our green waste bin, which is a huge convenience factor. Up until that point, I did home composting. And some people just don't have the stamina, because it does take work to maintain a good compost pile. You also have to have land. I mean, not a lot of it. You could have a little bit of land to be able to do it. You could even have your, under sink compost canister that you use, but I mean, those don't really create soil. It's more for temporary solution, right? I've known people to subscribe to services where they actually freeze their compost and ship it
Oh,
away.
wow.
I mean, there's all sorts of different services that you can use if you're really, really motivated. But again, it's not convenient enough to get mass adoption.
Really, and you said it's gotta be mass adoption. You're right. I mean, sometimes somebody might have some space, you gotta have space, but there's a lot of people in condos and apartments and, or maybe they're older. I love the fact that my parents are 80 and 82, and they live outside of Portland, so it's easy, right? They compost, they put everything in the right recycling bin. My dad's figured out the place that you can take styrofoam if they get styrofoam. There's a place that you can take that. Seattle's the same way. So it is possible to be trained to do so if you offer people the path to do it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The cities that have it best are probably San Francisco and New York City at this point, where they are just automatically include some solutions in their waste stream collection, whether or not it ends up in a specific and separate bin. Some of those waste facilities actually separate it at the waste facility themselves. And I've seen that when that is the case, they actually don't end up recycling quite as much as when you have self-sorted solutions. One of the things that they do in the EU, and if you haven't traveled in Germany or in some of these Western European countries, you may not have seen this. I mean, they recollect, they encourage people, like when you're done with your soda water bottle, that beautiful thick glass bottle, you take it back to the store for its redemption. And everyone is just in the habit of doing this. People have crates that they put their used bottles in, even their wine bottles, like all of the glass bottles that they produce, they take them back and mostly they're reused. So it would be helpful, I think, to get us in a place where we are actually building in some of these circular systems, but we're not there yet. We've seen some interesting tests and trials by brands. Like I saw Ben and Jerry's ice cream and some like Chex cereal were doing repackaged, and you would send it in and they would give you send the tin back and they would send it back with more ice cream or something to that effect. And I mean, I don't even know if those things are even out there anymore, but I remember them coming up about 4 or 5 years ago. What innovations are you seeing presently that could be a little bit more in that way, that kind of circular fashion?
Well, I mean, this is so old school, but the states that do have a bottle bill have an amazing amount of recycling. So whether that be like a Michigan or an Oregon, because Oregon it used to be 5 cents and I think it's 10 cents now.
Yeah, the redemption
That's
value.
the redemption that works. It absolutely works. It drives behavior. And I know it sounds old school, but sometimes old school works, right? I think there are some really interesting things going on right now. There's so much experimentation going on right now in packaging in terms of, let's say, reusing plastic, using the right plastic. I don't know if you've seen the new Vital Proteins canisters. I don't know if you've seen
Yes,
them
I
or
have.
not.
Yeah, so
Um,
Vital Proteins, just for people's context, is it's a bovine protein, right? It's the collagen, basically. And they market it to be added to any liquid, so you could even put it in your coffee if you wanted to. I don't use it, but others, many, many more people do, and essentially it will dissolve in something like any liquid fairly rapidly. But they sold them in these plastic canisters that are very typical of the protein space. That are just
Very large, very
cylinders,
large.
right? And now they're doing a paper carton, which is available in Costco. So I'm curious to see if they stick with it or if it ends up going also back out, because we've seen some brands come forward with innovative packaging and then phase it out again. Yeah, so I mean, that's new and we'll see if it lasts.
Yeah, we'll see if it's lasting. I'm currently talking to a company right now where they have figured out how to do aluminum pill bottles versus plastic that are CR. And aluminum can be recycled for forever. And they, I know, have done their first experiment, because when you go to Costco, you mentioned Costco, you go into the pharmacy part and there's all those huge plastic bottles, right? Of different supplements. The majority of them, I don't believe, are probably even recycled. I think the
No, the
majority of them are
recyclable
virgin.
HPDE, they're mostly white HPDE standard bottles, the Boston Rounds, right?
Mhm.
The only one in there I've seen that is aluminum so far is the U Theory Omega 3, which they came
Right.
forward with at Expo West last year. Those bottles are available on the market, but the minimum for them is quite high. So a lot of manufacturers won't even consider shifting to them yet. The minimum order quantities are something like 30,000 units. And so if you think about a smaller brand, you're not going to be able to have access to something like that just out the gates because of the minimum order quantity.
I'm
It's
actually
nice.
speaking to somebody who's working on something that would be addressed. So there's new things coming on from that perspective. There's a lot of experimentation and compostable
Mhm.
technology. I'm personally not a fan of what's out there right now for a lot of different reasons. We already brought up the first reason is the majority of compostable packaging that you see needs industrial composting, of which most
Yep.
people don't have access to. The other thing that is true for a lot of products is it doesn't protect products very well. So if you have potato chips, if you have something that's in a humid climate, I know somebody who moved all of their
Yep.
potato chip packaging produced in Canada into compostable and ended up taking almost all of it back way
Oh,
before its
it's
expiration date.
heartbreaking.
Well, it's heartbreaking. It's financially horrible, right? It's terrible from a waste perspective, and then had to move all back in. And I've worked with that person. I was not the one who sold them the compostable, but worked with them to move to a bag that is 40% post consumer. So it's not perfect.
It's not
You
perfect.
know,
Yes.
it's not perfect. It's interesting to see right now. You talked about people going back and forth.
Mhm.
I've noticed a lot of, I'll use crackers as a good example. I've seen a lot of crackers go from a bag in a box. They were in a pouch, going back to bag in a box. It's still a bag, right? There's still a bag in a box. So um, I'm, I don't know what's driving that. I don't know if that's because from a perception perspective, they think that makes it look like it's more sustainable. I don't know. In my own opinion, you've moved from two items to one, back to two, and they're still plastic.
And
So,
how?
um,
I was even thinking about recently, we used to be able to get Ritz crackers in this wonderful packaging that was just made of wax paper. Remember those
mhm.
days?
Yep,
And it's been plastic for a long time. And in fact, they made the plastic look the same color, so it almost looks like the waxed paper of yesteryear. There's no reason that they couldn't go back to that. They were in that
yeah, it
format.
protects the product. It protects,
It
especially because
protects the
Ritz
product.
crackers are pretty oily,
Right,
so they
exactly.
definitely needed it.
It was the perfect packaging, but it was cheaper to go to plastic, and so that's what they did. And this is the driver for so many companies. It actually ends up being a price issue. And so it's quite possible that, these multi-layer bags that they were starting to look at this from a production standpoint. The multi-layer bags, the chip bags that you see on the market are not recyclable. And so
Right.
because multi-layer bags are not recyclable and some of those inner bags are still technically recyclable because it's not necessarily a multi-layer bag, they may be making the pitch from that eco perspective of, well, the paper carton's recyclable, and then the clear-ish plastic bag on the inside could be more recyclable or not as toxic to the environment. I don't know. I just think it's probably a brand billboard perspective or a quality perspective that they're leaning into.
Or cost.
Or cost. Yep.
Or
Or
cost.
all three, right? So
Absolutely. Not to be, I feel like we're being so depressing. I'm not depressed, I promise.
no, there are
I
better
feel,
ways to do it. So I wanted to share. I know I've talked about Orlo before on this particular podcast because I'm involved in this project. I worked to help develop this brand. And one of the things that we leaned into was the potential to use a reusable bottle. And that's kind of what I was talking about a little bit earlier with like Ben and Jerry's was doing a test with some other
mhm.
cereal brands like Chex and all these other things where you could literally get the reusable canister and send it back to get more product. Now, I don't think that caught on, again, because it's going to be the few people who actually grab into something like that. So what we tried to do at Orlo is utilize something that was a really beautiful glass bottle. Like this is a thick glass. It's Miron violet glass. And one of the things, the attributes of Miron violet glass, the reason I like it is it blocks out the visible light. It means that you aren't going to get degradation of the oil within. We printed on the glass itself, so it's not excessive plastic. It's literally just printed right on. And this is hyper durable. I've dropped it in my bathroom on tile and it did not break. The lid is the only thing made of plastic. That said, we couldn't go to a compostable solution. I tried, right? I tried looking at other options that were available. So we ended up working with a reflective pouch. This is a multi-layer pouch. So it's not recyclable in like 99% of recyclers, right? So what you have to do is subscribe to one of those recycle boxes if you want to, and hopefully they'd be able to, move this into a second life. But this material is over 60% post-consumer recycled. So again, trying to build in a layer of something like that. Again, light is an issue with supplements. This blocks out all visible lights, and it's a resealable pouch, so you could reuse it. If you didn't get the starter glass bottle, you could just use this forever and it'd be fine too. So, I mean, there are ways to attack this, but this is still plastic. It's still not perfect. I would love to see something that could go to fiber carton, but try doing that in a soft gel. Try doing that in a gummy, for example, because these things do absorb moisture from the outside. You have to have something that's going to be a watertight seal, and that's challenging to do in the paper world, right? That's the biggest.
It is what you're showing, and we've done that with some other nutraceuticals and supplements companies. You've designed a jar that's beautiful, that also on the packaging side is something that you would love to see on your counter, or
that's the intention, right?
on your bedstand. So that's something that we've done for a number of clients, and it's definitely it's gaining legs, right, to do that. Plus, when you even look at the shipping charges for then shipping, so it takes less product to protect it. You're lowering your cost for shipping, all of those things. We do a ton of work in the health and beauty space, especially in hair care. And so that's another area where we are being challenged as an industry to come up with refillable solutions. Now, to be honest, the solution for refilling is also in a flexible package. Because right now, that is the majority of what it is. Sorry.
Yeah, I know.
And then we are also seeing in that space a lot more a lot more aluminum tubes, a lot more stuff done with ocean-bound plastic. You have a lot of options from that perspective to at least use, a high amount of recycled content or ocean-bound plastic in whatever your primary container is, or maybe it's aluminum. There are a lot of things that are being done in that space. It still has to look beautiful because it's health and beauty, and particularly the brands we work with are premium brands. So it has to really look nice. But that whole industry is very, very in tune with trying to have the whole concept of refillability. It's whenever you're building a new brand now, that's part of the conversation. It's like, how do we build that as part of our overall brand?
Yeah, well, we are seeing, for instance, refill stations for Dr. Bronner's soaps at
Yep.
Whole Foods markets now, which I think is novel, but also they used to do that with the old pumps back in the day at like the early health food stores. So now they have something that's more hyper modern, and they're starting to use that at certain Whole Foods. I think they've got it at 3 different locations presently as a trial. And I think that's great. That's helpful, but it's not for every premium product out there either. I do like aluminum. I know you mentioned aluminum. We also use aluminum in our immunity boost. But the thing that people forget about aluminum is it also has a coating of plastic along the inside. It's a very thin coating, so it's not like it's plastic free. And usually they have a plastic cap. And whether or not it's metal on the exterior, it has to have the plastic stuff inside to make it all seal well and everything else. So, I mean, getting 100% away from plastics is likely not going to happen in most packaging solution with liquids. Like there's something that's going to have another element to it. I mean, even when you look at Neuron Violet glass, beautiful glass jars, they do some that are pressure seals, like perfume bottle styles that are 100% glass, but that's not going to work for most products either. So what are you seeing that's new?
In any conversation that you have with a company, whether it's, I would say more mid-sized to large, because small ones have a hard time. You already brought it up. It's harder when you don't have as
The
much
scale.
funding, the scale. But anytime that I sit down with a mid-sized to even larger company, the really good news that I've seen a huge evolution in the last 5 years is that sustainability is at the beginning of the conversation when you're doing a rebrand, when you're doing a new brand. It's I work with Culligan, who's one of the largest water filtration companies in the world, and we have a whole brand new line that is actually in production right now. That's going to be launched this year. And in the very first meeting, which was last January, there were two people from their ESG team in the room. And 5 years ago, that would not have happened. And the way that I would describe that is it's really table stakes.
Mhm.
Whenever we're meeting with a customer for the first time or on a new brand, our first question is always, what's your sustainability directive? What are your commitments? And the good news is 9 times out of 10, somebody already has that they've already got a standard. They've already got that as part of their tenets. That's new. 5 years ago, it wasn't that way. The one thing that's not new, and you already brought it up, is it can't be a lot more expensive. So it can be 5% more expensive, maybe 10. It really can't be more than that. And if it's a large volume brand, it can't be 10. It's got to be something that's more reasonable. And I understand that. You have customers who will buy a brand that they see as sustainable. And if they can show that it's a tiny percent more, that's great. They're not going to spend a lot more money on something because the packaging is more sustainable. They just won't. I get it. It's dumb. Everybody talks about it, but I went grocery shopping on Sunday and 18 eggs in South Florida is $11, right? So when you're faced with that as a consumer, you start
Elizabeth,
making choices.
I have the same experience. I think we all do. A standard dozen of eggs, like the typical dozen eggs,
Hmm.
was $8 in my neck of the woods. And
Yeah,
this is because of the avian flu, but this now is happening a couple times a year, right? Like we get
right.
this intense shortage, and then everybody's paying basically close to $1 an egg, which is not something they're used to. Yeah, at a certain point, they start changing their spending habits. They'll do without the
It's
product.
They'll do without the product. They'll do without something else. You start looking at something and you look at how you look at the packaging. I mean, there's some things I just won't do. Like I hadn't seen eggs in styrofoam in 20 years until I was in South Florida. I can't buy eggs in styrofoam. I just won't. Right? I don't care if there are more. Right? There's just I have a line, but there I think if there are other ways that you can help a customer. One of the biggest things that we do, and I actually did this with a couple customers last year who wanted to be more sustainable, was helping them find a way to make their packaging smaller. Because that's the number one thing that you can do. And I tell this to everybody: if you want to be more sustainable, let's see if we can make your packaging smaller. Whether it's a
Even just
pouch, whether
10%
it's a
smaller.
carton,
It doesn't
it's
have to be
huge.
that much smaller. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be
Um,
that much smaller. And it can help you, like if you're worried about cost and you want to move to, let's say, a recycled pouch, right? Or if
mhm.
you want to move to a carton that is 100% post-consumer or even 50 or whatever, and you're worried about the cost, but if I can make it 10% smaller, right? Then I can get you the budget to help make that decision. And that's one of the things that I really try to do for our customers. And I think anytime you're sitting down with whoever your packaging provider is that, oh,
See?
you're showing me. Did you do that already?
Yeah, 10% smaller even on that one.
That's awesome.
So it just
See?
like and you don't even think about it. It's like it's literally, you know, about a half an inch shorter, but it holds the same amount. It just we said goodbye to a little bit extra of what was on the top and moved the zipper down just a tiny bit. And so just that alone saves, basically the rim of this.
Absolutely.
And, I mean, even if it is a quarter inch of plastic sheeting, a quarter of inch times the 30,000 that we're going to make of that pouch, it's significant. So use
It,
less, just a little bit.
and then the other thing that I do when I'm working with a customer is where is your product made? Right?
Mhm.
So I have a new client that I'm working with. So we produce lots of different products, and I have a new client that I'm working with that we're going to be doing all their labels. They have 60 SKUs, and their co-manufacturing plant where they're making everything is in Indiana. That happens to be where my label plant is that I'm going to be making this. So it's literally right down the road. But that's an example of that's one of my first questions is where are you making this product? Where is it being packed out? Because I want to try to make whatever is possible as close to that location as possible. And when we're deciding where to build or buy a new plant, part of our consideration is, okay, so what is that? So Chicago, we have a pretty significant pouch manufacturing plant. That is an awesome place to have packaging in Chicago, just because there's so much in that general area. And I have so many customers for whom that we're very close from a ship to. Shipping continues to be one of the largest violators to our ecosystem.
Mhm.
And there are certain things that I understand that you have to make in China, and I get it because there are certain things I have to make there that I don't have another choice. But I have a really hard time when somebody's like, well, is it cheaper for me to make this in China? And I'll use a pouch for a really good example because somebody just asked me about this. And I said, well, you have a tight timeline. So let me look at your airfare. Okay, you want this air freight. That's going to cost you 19 cents a pouch to air freight that, right? I bet you
Mhm.
didn't think about that. And what does that do from a sustainability perspective? Because you told me you wanted a pouch that was 40% post consumer. But if I'm flying it from China to Boston, I think your sustainability statement is gone. And
Well, it's all
those
how they're
are
accounting for it too, right? Like which scope of emissions they're accounting for it at. And yeah, I mean, it's such a complicated story. But now, as we face the challenges posed by a new political regimen, we know that there are likely to be tariffs imposed that will actually support more movement of manufacturing within the United States. So that's part of the silver lining. Like you, I also have worked to have the pouches created here in the United States and also try to keep the transit distance minimized. Sometimes you get some limitations in place from that, but we're encapsulating in Southern California as a for example, and then shipping it just across town to a packaging company to be packaged, and then send it via ground to Texas. And that's where our fulfillment partners are. And the reason we're working through Texas is because we can ship pretty much anywhere in the country within 4 or 5 business days from there via ground without having to air freight it, right? So it ends up being one central location. Now, would it be more ideal to have multiple locations? Sure, but we're not at a brand size yet where we can manage that much inventory delicately between distribution sites. We'll get there, but for now, this is working great, right? So trying to find the right solution for a company to help them manage those logistics and get to the point where they are producing, let's say, the most responsible product they can. Nothing comes without a carbon cost, right?
right.
That's just the reality. When I'm in my PhD program now at Prescott College in sustainability, and I learned that a single sheet of paper costs 2 gallons of water to create. You don't necessarily think about that, like a single sheet of paper. So, what does the carton cost? Not only from a carbon perspective, but from a water perspective. Fresh water being something that we really need to protect and preserve now, right? So, we think about all of these things as they lay into the sustainability of a given packaging item. And the answer, I think, at the end of the day seems to be if we can do less, do with less, then do with less, less packaging, less outer packaging. That might mean less of a brand billboard. So, how do you communicate about the brand, right? All of these questions start to come to the forefront. So, I wondered if you have helped brands to tackle that sort of piece, like let's say reducing from an outer box to only the thing that was inside, and still tackled that other perspective of the billboard of the brand, the communication strategy.
Actually, the majority of the nutraceuticals and supplements companies that we work with now, if we're able to participate with them at the beginning, right, of their brand or a rebrand, much like yours, a number of them had built into their system that they were going to have a secondary carton. And in almost every case, I've been able to encourage them not to do so. And I guess theoretically, I should want them to because I'll make money. But it's just not the right thing, and you don't need to do. And if you do a good enough job on your primary container, you don't need a secondary box. And sometimes I'm trying to think of, I have certain in health and beauty, you still see more of that secondary carton. But and I would say nutraceutical supplements, that world, that whole secondary carton is really going away. The unfortunate thing is when I do end up seeing it, it's because whatever the product is needs so much information given that's required by law. So my company, AE Global, is quietly one of the largest producers of custom packaging for the cannabis industry. And there are many, many times that we have to do a secondary carton that is literally only needed because whatever state government has decided that so much information is required that you don't have a choice. And that's really where, and sometimes those state governments require a secondary carton. So that's one of the hardest parts about that particular industry is there's a lot of waste in packaging that's completely driven by individuals who are making decisions up in some castle without really considering what they're doing and how they're impacting the overall environment.
Yeah, or they frankly may just not care about it. So
Well, okay, that may be true too. But we do. I would tell you that anytime I'm working on with something with somebody, we're always trying to figure out like, and part of it's also the budget, right? What can I get you that's amazing that's going to fit this budget?
Mhm. Now, I'd love for you to talk about how you're tackling things from that recyclability perspective. Like, are the solutions that you're using typically recycled and recyclable in most municipalities? Or are you also working with some things that are just a little bit more challenging in that space?
Anytime that we're working with a customer, we really do try to make sure that we're specifying something that's recycled and recyclable. And when we're taking over, I'll use Culligan as a really good example. The very first group of brands that I got to work with them on, we had them send them all, they had us send all of their existing packaging. All right. And they had 10 items, and these were like 200 items. And I went through all of them, all 200, and literally broke down everything that I could see that would address sustainability, and in almost every case also have the bonus of cost savings. So when we went through them, we found 10 items that were using a plastic clamshell. That was one of the first things. I was like, we need to get rid of that. All right, we can build you an insert that's going to protect the product that's corrugated. So we don't need to use the plastic clamshell. Now, in that case, that was a little bit more money, but they were really, what we were able to do is show them how to save enough money in the whole, like 200 SKUs, that more than made up for those 10 clamshells. We were also able to figure out there was at least, God, maybe 40 items where we figured out that we can make the box smaller. And by the
Mm.
box smaller, I'm talking sometimes by like this much, a lot.
Wow.
And so, and I joked there were a couple times I could pick up the box and I was shaking it because it's heavy stuff. And I was like, oh my God, I can fix this. And it could have been just, shorter, bringing in the overall dimensions. So we already talked about this, but the very first thing that we address is like, how do we right size this? And if there's single use plastic in there right now that's not recyclable, how do we get rid of that? So that's the very first thing. And when we're working on custom inserts, we automatically go to paper. So whether that's corrugated, whether that's paper foam, whether that's molded fiber, oftentimes we do not have the option to do molded fiber or paper foam because it's expensive and the minimums are too high. But we just did a great project for a new high-end filter, and we made the entire insert out of corrugate. It's great, and it's a great customer experience, and it completely protects the product. So 100% sustainable. In that case, you have the option to go really high recycled content on the corrugate itself. I'm a big fan of FSC, which stands for Forest Stewardship Council, which means that even if it's virgin or recycled, that there's a full chain of custody, which is really important. A lot of people don't, a lot of that came from the need to track where fiber was coming from. You had people
Yep.
who were literally cutting down the boreal forests. In Edmonton, you had cutting down the old growth forests in Indonesia. There was a reason for needing to understand that whole chain of custody. So I'm a big fan of FSC. It adds a couple of pennies. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things that's really worth it. And then if it needs to be plastic, can we do recycled? There are a number of states, like in the cannabis side in New York now, it's required to be at least 25% post-consumer, which is great. I think you're going to see that kind of rule in a lot of other states now. And it's honestly, it's easy. And going to a 25% post-consumer isn't that hard.
Yeah.
It doesn't even add a lot of costs. If it's flexible, we really recommend, again, like you said, I can do anywhere from 25 to like 60% post-consumer on flexible. Again, it's not that much more expensive. It's really where we lead. And if there's the option to utilize ocean-bound plastic, we have our own ocean-bound plastic facility in the Dominican Republic, which gathers and processes what would have been ocean-bound plastic to be back to the US to be either used in new packaging for us or for other people. One of my favorite stories is that Windex bottles are all going to be made out of ocean-bound plastic. That's perfect, right?
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, that's the kind of product that should be an ocean-bound plastic. And then I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, there's so many things that we talked about, and then obviously we talked about this, but where's your product going to be made, right? Where do I want to try to make whatever I'm making for you as close to there as possible.
What about some of the more novel materials? Like you mentioned you're in the hemp industry, the cannabis industry. What about using hemp fibers or mushroom like packaging? I've seen even like to help be some of that framework that would protect a glass bottle inside of something molded, whatnot.
It's a
What
matter of
are you?
critical mass. It's just
Mm,
not it's just not here yet. We've come across some amazing mushroom fiber products that are out of Australia. So that's I just very, very cool, huge future. I wish he made them here. In the case of hemp paper is very, very expensive, like 3 times the cost. And it's cool, it's great, and I've shown it to people, but in terms of scale, they just can't afford it. And I totally understand that. There just needs to be more.
mhm.
And once something has gone to critical scale, then absolutely, because hemp paper is awesome. It's really strong. It prints just fine. The number one source of hemp paper right now is actually coming out of Spain. So, it'd be great if it was made here. There are a lot of people trying. It will come, just like
Mhm.
just like compostable, but it's a matter of just getting to critical mass to the point where it's affordable.
Yeah. Well, we see movement too, even on the inks space. So, for instance, with Orlo, we're working with black ink that's actually from algae. It's algae based inks, right? As opposed to petrochemical based inks. I've interviewed Scott Fulbright, the co founder of Living Ink Technologies, on this podcast. And I've been following his work for some time. He's working with some major brands. And in particular is working with Patagonia, has done a project with Adidas, is doing some stuff in the fashion industry where they're even using their algae-based inks as would be t-shirt silk screening material, as well as even fabric dyes, which is really interesting, right? It's using another material that is a co-product with production of stuff for nutrition. It actually comes from spirulina cultivation. So you make something for humans to consume, and then they're able to take the waste stream from that and turn it into ink, which is incredible.
I think one of the things that this goes back to the federal thing is that I didn't realize until I started working with Culligan that the federal government limits the ability to use post-consumer plastic in a lot of items.
Yes, they
And it
do.
and it doesn't make any sense, to be
If
honest.
it
It really
touches the
doesn't.
product, it's supposed to be virgin. So this is why, for instance, like a bottle, if you get this plastic bottle, right? Just a simple Boston round plastic bottle. Only a certain percentage of it can be post-consumer recycled because the part that touches the gummies has to be virgin plastic, right?
Correct, but it's even worse for example, like a Brita pitcher or the Culligan Zero Water pitchers. Those
Mm,
are not allowed to have any post-consumer content. And it honestly doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't. And that's one of the things that and again, I mean, I could go on a whole thing about all the different things that the government needs to address, but that's one of the areas where there just needs to be more testing and somebody in the government willing to go, oh yeah, I could see how that would make sense, right? Because there's all kinds of things that you could be using post-consumer plastic. You could be using ocean-bound plastic for a number of things that right now isn't allowed.
yeah.
And I would tell you from a future perspective, we all know that there's plenty of plastic out there to be utilized and turned into new things.
Mhm.
Part of the challenge is being able to work through regulations to be able to use it for all the things it could be used for.
Because it ends up downcycled. There are even technologies now on the recycling side where they're trying to figure out how to make recycled plastic just like virgin plastic and all of its properties.
Mhm.
And they're able to do that at small scale. Hasn't yet gone out to full like manufacturing capacity, but it's more like university project level at this point, right? Like the technology's there, the scale isn't there yet.
You
And
would
once
still have to get the US government to approve it.
Exactly. So again, for regulation purposes, there's a reason that everything gets downcycled. Like that milk carton made of plastic doesn't get recycled as another milk carton or another supplement bottle or anything like that. It ends up downcycled. And so even the plastic bottle that you're consuming of your supplements that might end up being, like a park bench or something to that effect, or Trex decking, something like that, like with a recycled component of it. It's not likely to end up in another, what you would
Like
consider
to
first
like.
use. Mhm.
Yep.
It's just the way it is. Unfortunate, but it's our present reality. I wondered if there was a particular project that you could showcase as something that you're very proud of that you can speak about publicly?
The Culligan one I'm pretty proud of,
Mm.
just because we were able to go through and from start to finish have an organization that was 100% committed to being as sustainable as possible.
Yeah, so you're speaking
Um,
about vital proteins now, right?
no, Culligan.
Okay,
Culligan.
sorry. Collagen.
Culligan.
I was thinking collagen.
No,
Pardon me.
Culligan. No, that's okay. So that has been, um, it's been refreshing to be working with an organization for whom, again, yes, at ESG, but everybody realized in their company that was table stakes. The other thing working with them has been they currently have a program that has, we're all working to try to figure out how to make it even better, but they have a program where you can send in your used filters, kind of like the K cups. I don't do a K cup, but it's a similar type of thing where you can send in their filters and then they're sent and they're basically broken apart and take out the parts that they can recycle, which are quite a few items. And then when you do send that, then you get a coupon. You get a coupon that you can go back and so that's your incentive, right? Besides being a good human, to do that.
I
Um,
used to do that with my printer cartridges, and then the company stopped supporting that. I was
oh,
like,
I'm sorry.
because printer ink is like very wasteful too. Those cartridges are
They're
pretty
huge,
intense,
right?
right?
Yeah,
They've got
they're
the
big.
wheels in them and everything. Like, why do they have to be wasted each time? So, I mean, we need to encourage more of that, I think. The
We
ability to
do,
reuse or recycle these items is really, really important.
and find a way so that it's so that your partners can be cost neutral or even find a way to have it be profitable. Like
Yep.
in like in Seattle, they have Ridwell. I don't know if they have that where you guys are. And Ridwell is it looks like the milkman box on your front porch, and that's where you put all the stuff that you can't put in the recycle. I mean, it's not everything, but they give you a big list of all the things that you can put in there that you couldn't put in your recycling bin. And they've made that a business. So they've figured out how to make money doing that. I think that's the unfortunate part of our world is you have to find ways to have whatever program you have at least somebody is going to be cost neutral or at least find some profit.
Yeah. Well, I just interviewed June Jolie on this podcast. She's an ethnographic food specialist, right? She's a food
Mhm.
ethnographer, as
Oh,
you would
that's
call it.
cool.
And she actually spoke at Expo West last year as one of the keynote speakers.
I saw her. That's how I know that name. Okay.
Yeah, so I just had her on the podcast. She's local to me, so I've developed a friendship with her. I've spent time with her a couple times in person up in San Francisco near her home. And then at Google and a project where I actually helped her work an event so that I could see what it was like to create this experience that connected to food for a bunch of the Googlers, right? Googleites, I don't remember what you call them really. At any
I
rate,
don't Googlers, whatever.
Googlers, right? And it was just such a pleasant experience to spend that time with her. She shared with me a story. She's working with a dairy brand, and she visited one of these local stores that they refer to as the local Walmart, and they call it the Amish Walmart. It's not a Walmart. It's not related to a Walmart at all, but they have all these individual like used pieces of farm equipment that have been repurposed or that could be reused for something else. I mean, even down to axe handles and things like that, right? So it's really interesting to see that in some of these communities, like where the Amish and Mennonites are present, that they've figured out ways to keep these kinds of systems in place. And I feel like if we could learn from them just a little bit about, durability and, using and reusing goods that have a longer life or creating goods that have a longer life, I think we'll be in a better spot just overall.
I agree. I'm very anti-fast fashion. So I completely agree. I love consignment. So I love
Consignment.
repurpose. I'm a big fan of the 50s. So there are many things in my home here and my home in Seattle that are from the 50s. I just love it. I love
Well,
repurposing things.
and I knew when I was in my early 20s that I was going to buy one KitchenAid mixer that I was going to have for the rest of my life.
There you
How
go.
many people still do that, right?
Well, that's what I have, a red one. What color is yours?
Mine is caviar, so it's black sparkly.
Ooh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yes.
this I bought it in 1998, 1999, maybe. Yeah. So I've had it for like 25 years already,
So
And
I got mine, let's see. I got married in 2001. I got mine in 1999.
yeah.
And you're right. You buy right and it lasts forever. My mom still has hers and it's white and that thing's got to be okay. My parents have been married for 58 years, so it's probably 58 years old.
Yeah, my mom's was a very telling color of avocado green. Remember
Ooh,
that?
that's the best. My parents had what was that burnt orange or that burnt umber color? Their appliances. Yep, I
Yeah,
remember that.
burnt sienna. I think it was
That
like
was
on
it.
everything, right?
It was
From
burnt
crayon
sienna.
to refrigerators, right?
It was in the same time period as the avocado.
That's right. Yeah. Well, listen, I have so appreciated this time today. I look forward to staying connected. I feel like there are some synergies in what you're doing and what I'm doing. And I would love to just offer you the floor for a moment to perhaps offer either a question that you wish I'd asked and I haven't, and you could ask and answer it, or some closing thoughts that people could take with them as they conduct their days.
You didn't ask me this question, but I should have included as part of this. You asked what was new. 10 years ago, I worked on a really large project with a customer. And because of who I am, I specified sustainable substrates for everything. But they never asked me to do that. And when they were about to launch the product, everything's made, the whole thing, been working on it for a year and a half. Their marketing department called me to ask me what was sustainable about their packaging. The great thing is that doesn't happen anymore. At least it doesn't happen to me. So, and then now it's the complete opposite of where it's part of the early conversation. And that's what I ask everybody. That would be one of my closing notes is that when you are starting to either do a rebrand, redo your packaging, start something new, you want to launch something, keep sustainability as part of the conversation at the very beginning and think about your packaging at the very beginning. You'll it gives you a lot more flexibility in the long run. Best way to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm Elizabeth Corbett, again, president of the enterprise group at AE Global here in Miami. I'm truly, truly passionate about sustainability and creating sustainable solutions. And I grew up in Oregon. It's part of who I am to the very core. And I personally consider it in every single project that we're working on. And so does my company. It's part of our culture.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Elizabeth. I will be sure to include links to everywhere people can find you with show notes, as always, as well as on our blog page on our website, caremorebebetter.com. So I want to just close with one thought as well as I invite you to stick around for a minute. And that is this. I think we need to, as consumers, as individuals, demand better. And what I mean by that is really truly committing to vote with our dollars. If we see something that is in the wrong packaging, then maybe we choose not to buy it. And maybe we tell that company, I'm choosing not to buy this because I see that you're using all of this excessive packaging. You could do better, and I love your product, but I'm not going to buy it today. Or to even just limit the amount of plastic that you bring into your home. Consider buying more real whole foods and less that are coming from the packaged aisles. It's possible to spend a little bit more time in the kitchen, have your dollars stretch further, and be actually producing a lot less waste. I know it sounds hard, but step by step, you can take these baby steps with us. And I will also encourage you, if you do not have a composting program in your municipality, do not be silent. You can demand that your local waste management company makes your life a little bit easier. And if enough of you raise your hand and say you want it, guess what? The solutions will come. Well, with that, Elizabeth, I just want to thank you again for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
To find out more about Elizabeth Corbett and her greener packaging solutions, I encourage you to visit our blog page for this episode. It includes the video version of this podcast, complete transcripts, and links to the resources and past episodes that we mentioned today. While you visit Care More Be Better, please join our newsletter. For every new subscriber, we're planting a tree through our partnership with Forest Planet and 1% for the Planet. Thanks for being a part of this pod and this community, because together we really can do so much more. We can care more, we can be better, we can reduce our global plastic waste issue and make the world a little bit greener and a little bit brighter each day. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for social good. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with your friends to help us reach more people and spread more social good.